What if the strongest person in the world wasn't a king, a soldier, or a hero, but an old woman quietly repairing a forgotten bridge in the middle of a forest? Every day, strangers crossed that bridge. Some were happy. Some were grieving. Some were running toward a new beginning, while others were trying to leave the past behind. She asked for nothing in return. She simply listened, smiled, and kept the bridge standing. Over the years, the bridge became more than stone and wood. It became a place where lives briefly touched before continuing on their separate paths. Today's story is a work of fiction about kindness, connection, and the unexpected impact one quiet life can have on countless others. Let's begin. My name is Elsa Whitmore, and I am 83 years old, and I have spent the last 41 years of my life sweeping moss off a bridge that nobody asked me to sweep. That's the hook, isn't it? That's the part where you're supposed to lean in and go, wait, why would a woman do that? Well, stick around, because even I didn't know the real answer until 3 months ago, when a boy named Sam showed up on my bridge with a broken bicycle and a broken home, and cracked something open in me that I'd sealed shut since 1985. Let me back up. The bridge sits in Miller's Hollow, a stretch of forest outside a small town in Vermont that most maps don't bother naming properly. It's an old stone bridge, the kind they don't build anymore, with mossy arches and a low wall you can lean your elbows on and watch the creek underneath pretend to be a river. My cottage sits 50 yards from it, close enough that I can hear footsteps on the stone from my kitchen window. Every morning, rain or shine, snow or blistering heat, I walk out with my bucket, my wire brush, and my bad hip, and I clean that bridge. I pull weeds from between the stones. I patch the cracks with mortar I mix myself, my hands remembering the ratio even when my mind forgets what day it is. The town calls me the Bridge Lady. Some of them say it kindly. Some of them say it like I'm a local ghost story that happens to still pay property taxes. Elsa, you're 83, my niece Patricia tells me every single time she visits, which is not often, praise God. You don't have to do this anymore. The town has maintenance crews. The town's maintenance crews, I tell her, couldn't repair a shoelace, let alone a bridge that's older than the state of Vermont. That usually shuts her up for a minute. Patricia is my brother's daughter, 49 years old, drives a car that costs more than my cottage, and has never once in her life sat still long enough to notice a bridge, let alone tend one. I love her. I do. But she looks at me the way you look at a stray dog that insists on sleeping outside even when you've left the door open, with pity, and a little bit of exhaustion. What Patricia doesn't understand, what nobody in my family has understood for 4 decades, is that the bridge isn't a chore. It's a promise. And I have never, not once, told a living soul what that promise was for. Until Sam. It was a Tuesday in April, the kind of Vermont spring day where the air still bites but the light has gone soft and gold, like the world's apologizing for winter. I was on my knees at the north end of the bridge, working mortar into a crack that had been bothering me since March, when I heard the screech of bicycle brakes and a small, furious voice say a word that no 11-year-old should know, let alone use in front of an old woman. I looked up. There he was. Skinny kid, maybe 11 or 12, jeans torn at the knee in a way that wasn't fashion, it was just torn, bicycle chain hanging loose like a broken necklace, and a face red with the kind of anger that's really just sadness wearing a disguise. I know that face. I wore it myself once. You all right? I called out. He startled, like he hadn't seen me, which, fair, I do blend into stonework at this point, and then he squared his shoulders in that way kids do when they're deciding whether to trust you or tell you to mind your own business. Chains broke, he said. I can see that. I can fix it myself. I didn't say you couldn't. That earned me a look. Suspicious. Like I was up to something. I understand that too. When you're a kid and your world has cracked, you start expecting everything else to crack along with it, including strangers who offer kindness for no obvious price. I went back to my mortar. Didn't push. That's the first thing you learn, tending a bridge, you don't rush the crack. You clean it out gently, you let it breathe, and then you fill it slow, or the patch won't hold. 10 minutes later, chain still broken, bicycle upside down and looking more wounded by his efforts than before, the boy sat down on the low stone wall, put his head in his hands, and made a sound I recognized instantly. Not crying, exactly. The sound you make right before crying, when you're still trying to hold the dam. You want some water? I asked. I've got a thermos. Not poisoned, before you ask. He let out a short laugh despite himself, a wet, hiccuping thing. I wasn't gonna ask that. Good, because I was going to be very offended. He came and sat near me, not too near, kids have radar for that, and I handed him the tin cup from my thermos. He drank. Watched me work the trowel into the stone. Why do you do that? He asked. Do what? Fix a bridge nobody owns. And there it was. The question I'd been asked 1,000 times by 1,000 different mouths, and I'd always had 1,000 different deflections ready. Keeps me busy, keeps me out of trouble, somebody's got to do it, the town forgot about this place and I didn't. All true. All also lies of omission, which, my late husband used to say, are just lies wearing church clothes. But something about this kid, sitting there with his ruined bicycle and his ruined face, staring at that crack in the stone like it meant something to him too, made me say something different. I made a promise a long time ago, I told him. To somebody I loved very much. And this bridge is how I keep it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the bridge, really looked at it, the way people rarely do, not as a thing to cross, but as a thing that's been crossed, thousands of times, by thousands of feet, each one carrying its own private storm. My mom and dad are getting divorced, he said, out of nowhere, the way kids do, like the sentence had been sitting behind his teeth for weeks waiting for a safe place to fall. I was riding away. I don't even know where I was riding to. I just wanted to be somewhere they weren't yelling. I nodded slowly. I did not say I'm sorry. I've learned, in 83 years, that I'm sorry is often just a period at the end of someone's sentence when what they need is a comma, a place to keep going. Bridges, I said instead, are good for that. Being somewhere else without actually going anywhere. He almost smiled. Almost. I'm Sam, he said. Elsa. Are you really gonna fix my chain? I'm really going to try, I said. I fix stone. Bicycles are a foreign country to me. But I've got a granddaughter's old bike in my shed with a chain that should fit, and you're welcome to borrow it while I sort yours out, if you don't mind riding something with a banana seat and glitter on it. That got the first real laugh out of him. It was a good laugh. Loud, surprised at itself. I did not tell him, that day, that I don't have a granddaughter. That the bicycle in my shed had belonged to somebody else entirely, and that I hadn't opened that shed door in 11 years. I did not tell him about the promise. But something about the way he looked at that bridge, like it was listening, told me that before summer was over, I was going to tell somebody. And some deep, tired, 83-year-old part of me suspected it might as well be him. Because here's the thing about secrets, the thing I'd learned from 4 decades of silent moss scraping and mortar mixing, they don't stay buried. They just wait for the right crack to climb out of. And Sam, with his broken bicycle and his broken home, had just found mine. Sam came back the next day. And the day after that. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine so natural it was like it had always existed, like the bridge had been waiting for him the same way it had been waiting for me, all those years ago. He'd ride up around 4 in the afternoon, dump his, still borrowed, still glittery, bicycle against the stone wall, and either help me work or sit and talk while I worked. Mostly the second one. I am, contrary to what Patricia believes, an excellent listener. 41 years of talking to a bridge that never talks back will do that to a person. My dad moved into an apartment, Sam told me one afternoon, tossing pebbles into the creek with more force than the pebbles deserved. It's got exactly 1 bedroom. He says I can have the couch when I visit. The couch, Elsa. Like I'm a guest. You are, in a way, I said, and when he glared at me, I held up a hand covered in mortar dust. Not a bad way. Everybody who visits somewhere is a guest there. I'm a guest in my own kitchen every morning until I've had my coffee. That's different. Is it? He threw another pebble. Didn't answer. I let the silence sit, the way you let mortar sit before you smooth it, because pushing too soon just cracks the whole thing open wrong. My mom cries in the bathroom, he said finally, quiet. She thinks I can't hear her. But the walls are thin, and I hear everything. That's a heavy thing to carry, I said. Hearing everything. Yeah. He looked up at me, and for a second he wasn't 11, he was ancient, the way children get sometimes when life hands them grief before it hands them the tools to carry it. Did you ever hear your parents fight? Every night for a year, I said. Before my father left. His eyes went wide. It's a strange thing, being old, people forget you had a childhood at all, like you were poured into the world already gray-haired and stubborn. Really? Really. And I used to sit on our porch steps and pretend I was somewhere else entirely. A queen in a castle. An explorer at sea. Anything but a girl on a porch listening to her family come apart. Did it help? Pretending? I thought about that. Really thought, trowel resting against my knee, the creek chattering underneath us like it had opinions about my answer. For a little while. But eventually you have to stop pretending and figure out how to actually live in the world you've got. That's the harder part. And the more important one. Sam was quiet after that. But he came back the next day, same time, same glittery bicycle, and the day after that too, and slowly, without either of us really deciding it on purpose, the bridge became his porch step. His somewhere else that was still, somehow, exactly where he was. It was the second week when he finally asked about the shed. We were walking back to my cottage because I'd promised him lemonade, the real kind, made with actual lemons, not the powder Patricia buys me that tastes like sweetened chalk, and he stopped in front of the shed door like a dog that's caught a scent. What's in there? Nothing that concerns you, I said, a little too fast, and I saw his eyebrows shoot up, because kids may not always understand grief, but they understand tone, and mine had given something away. That's exactly what my mom says about the divorce papers on the kitchen table, he said. Nothing that concerns you. It concerns me a lot, actually. Sharp kid. Too sharp for his own good, maybe, or maybe exactly sharp enough. It's a bicycle, I said. The one I lent you. It came from in there. There's more than a bicycle in there. I can tell. The door's got a padlock and everything else around here doesn't. He wasn't wrong. Everything else on my property was open: the tool shed for the bridge supplies, the little greenhouse where I grow tomatoes I'm too stubborn to admit I can no longer eat much of, the porch where I sit some evenings and pretend I'm not waiting for something. But that shed, the one behind the cottage, half swallowed by ivy I never let anyone trim, that one had a padlock, and a key I kept on a chain around my neck, under my shirt, against my heart, where it had lived for 11 years. Some things, I told Sam, aren't ready to be looked at. Not because they're bad. Because looking at them costs something, and I haven't decided if I'm willing to pay yet. He nodded slowly, like that was a language he understood better than most 11-year-olds should. Like the couch, he said. Like the couch, I agreed, and we went inside for lemonade, and I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Because that night, lying in my bed listening to the wind move through the pines the way it had moved through them for the 4 decades I'd lived here, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I got up, walked to my dresser, and took out the small tin box where I kept the things too precious for daylight. A photograph, curling at the edges. A boy's laugh caught mid-motion, blurred because he never held still for a camera, not once in his short life. A birthday card with a crayon drawing of a bridge, my bridge, with 2 stick figures on it, one tall, one small, holding hands. Happy birthday Grandma Elsa, love Danny. I wasn't his grandmother. Not by blood. Life is complicated that way sometimes, and I'll get to that, I promise, because you deserve the whole truth and I intend to give it to you. But that card, drawn by a 7-year-old's careful, crooked hand, was the reason I had spent 41 years on my knees on a bridge, filling cracks that the forest kept trying to make again. I put the tin box back. I did not cry. I'd done my crying, decades of it, enough tears to fill that creek twice over. What I felt instead, lying there with the wind in the pines, was something stranger, a loosening. Like a stone that's been mortared in too tight, finally given a little room to breathe. The next afternoon, Sam showed up with his chain fixed, his real bicycle, the borrowed one returned to the shed, and a question that had clearly been eating at him all night, because kids, God bless them, do not know the meaning of let it lie. Was it a person? He asked, before he'd even parked the bike. In the shed. Was there a person you lost? I looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved the leaves above us, dappling light across the stones of the bridge, across his worried, too sharp, too kind face. And I made a decision I'd been circling for 11 years without ever quite landing on. Come sit, I said, patting the low wall beside me. I think it's time I told somebody the whole story. And I think, God help me, it might as well be you. Sam sat. And for the first time in 4 decades, I opened my mouth to tell the truth about why I keep this bridge. His name was Danny. Daniel Reyes Whitmore, though everybody just called him Danny, and he was not my grandson by blood, he was my husband Frank's grandson from Frank's first marriage, which made him, on paper, a kind of family that lawyers have complicated names for and love has a much simpler one, mine. He was mine the second I met him, 4 years old, missing his front teeth, absolutely convinced that I was secretly a witch because I could make bread rise like magic. You're not a witch, right, Grandma Elsa? He'd ask me constantly, eyes huge and hopeful, because 4-year-olds want witches to be real almost as much as they want them not to be dangerous. I'm not saying I am, I'd tell him, kneading dough, and I'm not saying I'm not. He'd shriek with delighted terror and run to hide behind Frank's legs, and Frank would laugh that big barrel laugh of his, and I would think, in that kitchen, in that life, that I had somehow, against all odds, ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. I told Sam all of this sitting on the bridge wall, my voice steadier than I expected, though my hands found the mortar bucket beside me and held on to its handle like an anchor. Frank and I married late, I said. I was 42. Never thought I'd have children of my own, my body had other plans, and I'd made peace with that, mostly, the way you make peace with a leaky roof. You patch what you can and you stop expecting it to be new again. And then here comes Frank, 60 years old, widower, with a grown son and a little grandson who needed somebody steady in his life because his own mother had, well. That's not my story to tell, and it's not a happy one, and I'll leave it there. So Danny came to live with you? Summers, mostly. And holidays. His father worked construction, traveled a lot, and Frank and I had the room and the time. And oh, Sam. My voice caught, just slightly, on his name, the first time I'd said it out loud in years. That boy had a way of making a whole house feel like it had been holding its breath until he walked in. Sam pulled his knees up to his chest, listening the way kids listen to the good part of a scary story, leaning in, even though some animal part of them knows what's coming isn't good. He loved this bridge, I said, running my hand along the stone beside me, feeling the grooves I knew by heart. Frank used to bring him here fishing, though there's not a single fish in this creek worth catching, never has been, but Danny didn't care. He'd sit right here, I patted the stone, for hours, making up stories about trolls underneath, about kings who used to cross here, about a whole kingdom that existed just for him. He used to say this bridge was magic. That it could take you anywhere you wanted to go, if you believed hard enough. What happened to him? There it was. The question. I'd known it was coming since the moment I opened my mouth, and still it landed like a stone dropped into still water. It was 1985, I said. October. He was 7 years old. There'd been storms that autumn, bad ones, and the creek had swollen up higher than I'd ever seen it, brown and fast and loud in a way that wasn't like itself at all. Frank had told him, we'd both told him, stay off the bridge when the water's high, the old stones get slick, and Danny, God, that child had a stubborn streak a mile wide, get it from his grandfather I always said. Danny didn't listen. I stopped. Sam didn't say anything. He'd gone very still, the way kids do when they realize a story has stopped being a story and started being a memory that still bleeds. I was in the kitchen, I said. Making bread. He'd asked to come with me to check on the bridge. I used to walk it every evening even then, just to look at it, I loved it that much, and I told him no, stay inside, it's getting dark. And he said okay. And he lied to me, sweet as anything, looked me right in the eye and lied, because that's what 7-year-olds do when they want an adventure badly enough. My hands had found each other in my lap, gripping tight. Frank found him. Not me, Frank. I've thanked God for that every day since, and I've hated myself for being grateful for it every day since too, because what kind of person is glad her husband had to see that instead of her? Danny had gone out to the bridge on his own. The water was high. The stone was slick, just like we said. He slipped. My voice had gone very quiet, very flat, the voice I'd used to tell exactly 2 other people this story in 41 years. He hit his head on the stone wall going down. The creek took him almost a quarter mile before Frank could reach him. By the time he did, I couldn't finish that sentence. I never can. 41 years and that particular door only opens partway before something in my chest slams it shut again, mercifully, the way a body protects itself from a wound that would otherwise never stop bleeding. Sam had tears running down his face, unashamed, the honest tears of a child who hasn't yet learned to be embarrassed by his own heart. Elsa, he whispered. He died right here, I said, gesturing at the creek below us, my voice steadying again through sheer force of will. the same will that had gotten me through 4 decades of mornings. Not in a hospital, not surrounded by machines. Right here, in this water, under this bridge, with his grandfather holding him and screaming for me, and me running so fast I fell twice in the yard and didn't even feel it until the next day when I found the bruises. "I'm so sorry," Sam said, and this time it wasn't a period, it was exactly the comma it needed to be, and I nodded and let it be enough. "Frank never forgave that bridge," I continued. "Wanted to tear it down. Petitioned the town for years, said it was a death trap, said no child should ever be able to do what Danny did again. And I understood that. God, I understood it in my bones. But I couldn't let him." "Why not?" I looked at Sam, really looked at him, this skinny, too smart, heartbroken kid who'd wandered onto my bridge with a broken chain and cracked something open in an old woman who thought she'd sealed herself shut for good. "Because it wasn't the bridge's fault," I said. "The bridge didn't do anything except be there, solid and old and unmoving, the way bridges are supposed to be. It was the water that took him. It was a storm, and bad luck, and a stubborn little boy who wanted one more adventure before bedtime. If we tore down the bridge," I told Frank, "then we'd have nothing left of the place he loved most in the world. We'd just have absence. And I couldn't bear absence. I needed somewhere to put my love now that I couldn't hand it to him directly anymore." "So you started fixing it." "So I started fixing it," I confirmed. "Every crack. Every bit of moss that tries to make the stone slick again, the way it was slick that night. Every single day, I make sure this bridge is safer than it was the day it took him. It's not much of a promise, in the grand scheme of things. It didn't bring him back. It doesn't undo one single second of that October evening. But it's something, Sam. It's the only conversation I still get to have with him. Every crack I fill, I'm saying, I've got you now. I should have had you then, and I didn't, and I will spend every day I have left making sure this bridge never takes anything from anyone else, ever again." Sam wiped his face with the back of his hand, sniffling hard. "Is that why you keep the shed locked? Is that where his stuff is?" I nodded. "His bicycle. His fishing rod, though God knows he never caught a single fish with it. His clothes, some of them, that I never could give away. Frank passed 11 years ago, his heart, quiet, in his sleep, the easiest death I've ever witnessed, and I still wasn't ready for it. And after that I put the last of it in that shed and locked the door and told myself I was done opening it." "Why'd you let me borrow the bicycle, then?" His voice was small. "If it was so locked up." That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been avoiding even in my own head. "Because you needed it," I said slowly, feeling my way through the truth as I spoke it, the same way I feel my way through a crack in old stone, not sure what I'll find until my fingers are already in it. "And because some tiny, stubborn part of me, the same part that's kept this bridge safe for 41 years, recognized something in you the day you rode up here with your chain broken and your whole world falling apart. I recognized a boy who needed somewhere to put his fear that wasn't a house full of yelling. I recognized," my voice cracked, "finally, after all that steadiness, I recognized Danny's kind of stubborn. His kind of sad but still riding the bike anyway. And I thought, well, Elsa, you old fool, maybe it's time that bicycle got used by a child again instead of gathering dust in memory of one who can't use it anymore." Sam was crying properly now, and so, I realized, was I, the dam I'd built so carefully over 4 decades, developing its first real crack in the presence of an 11-year-old boy on a stone bridge in the fading gold light of a Vermont afternoon. "I'm sorry I asked about the shed," he said. "Don't be," I told him, pulling him into a hug that neither of us had planned but both of us needed badly. Sam, listen to me. You didn't break anything by asking. You opened something. There's a difference, and it took me 41 years on my knees on this bridge to understand it. We sat there a long while, the two of us, an old woman and a boy who wasn't hers, on a bridge that had taken one child from her and, in some strange and roundabout way that I was only beginning to understand, had just handed her another. Word travels fast in small towns, faster still when the person doing the talking is a 9-year-old with a big mouth and a bigger imagination, and by the following week, half of Miller's Hollow apparently knew that the bridge lady told Sam Whitfield about her dead grandson. I found this out because Patricia showed up unannounced on a Thursday, car door slamming with the kind of force reserved specifically for family confrontations, and marched up my porch steps with an expression I hadn't seen on her since she was 16 and I'd caught her sneaking out to meet a boy named Kyle whose primary personality trait was a motorcycle he didn't know how to ride safely. "Aunt Elsa," she said, "we need to talk." About? About the fact that you told some stranger's kid about Danny before you ever told me the full story. My own cousin. I was 6 when he died, Elsa, and all I ever got was there was an accident and a closed door whenever I asked questions. Well, that landed harder than I expected, and I sat down in my porch chair rather heavily, because 83-year-old knees do not appreciate surprises, physical or emotional. "Sit," I told her, and to her credit, she did, though she perched on the edge of the chair like she was ready to bolt. "I don't understand you," Patricia said, and her voice cracked on the word understand, and I realized with some surprise that under all that expensive car, big city armor, my niece was actually hurt. Genuinely, deeply hurt. "You've spent 40 years shutting everyone in this family out of that part of your life. Dad used to say you'd gone somewhere he couldn't follow after Danny died, and he never got you back, not really, not before he passed. And now some kid you've known for 3 weeks gets the whole story on a park bench? It's not a park bench, it's a bridge wall, and that's not nothing, Patricia, that bridge is. I don't care about the bridge," she said, and there it was, the real fight underneath the fight, the way it always is with family. "I care that you let a stranger in and you never let me in. Do you know what that feels like? To watch you love a shed full of dead boys' things more than you seem to love your own living family?" The words hung there in the porch air, ugly and true in the way only family accusations can be, cutting exactly because there's enough truth in them to hurt and enough unfairness in them to make you angry too. "That is not fair," I said, low. "Maybe not. But it's how it feels." I looked at my niece, really looked at her, the way I'd learned to really look at things these past few weeks, since Sam rode up with his broken chain and cracked something open that had apparently been waiting to be cracked for a very long time. Patricia, 49, divorced herself 2 years back though she never talks about it, no children of her own by choice or circumstance I'd never pried into, driving 3 hours every few months to check on an aunt who mostly told her to mind her own business. "You're right," I said. That stopped her cold. "What?" "You're right. I shut everyone out. Not just you." Frank, toward the end, though he understood it better than most because he was grieving in his own locked room too. "My brother, your father, God rest him, I let that man die without ever telling him the whole truth of what happened that night, and he asked me, Patricia, he asked me 100 times over the years and I told him there's nothing more to tell every single time, which was a lie, and he knew it was a lie, and he let me have my lie because he loved me. And you." I reached over and took her hand, which she allowed, stiffly. "You, I shut out worst of all, because you were young enough that I thought I was protecting you. But really I think I was just protecting myself. Grief makes cowards of the strongest people, Patricia. I built a fortress out of that bridge and I let exactly no one inside it for 41 years. Then why Sam? Her voice had softened, but the hurt was still there, threaded through every word. Why him and not me? I thought about that carefully, because she deserved a careful answer, not a quick one. Because Sam didn't ask me to open the door, I said finally. He asked me why I fix a bridge nobody owns, and something about the way he asked it, with his own world falling apart around him, needing somewhere safe to put his fear, it just came out. It wasn't a decision, Patricia. It was a crack that had been forming for 11 years, since Frank died, and Sam just happened to be standing there when it finally gave way. I promise you, if you'd been standing there instead, it would have been you. That's not entirely comforting, she said, but there was the ghost of a smile in it now. I never said I was good at comfort. I'm good at mortar and stone. Comfort I'm still working on, 41 years late. She laughed, a wet, surprised sound, not unlike the one Sam had made that first day, and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. God, we're a mess, this family. We are, I agreed. But we're a mess that's still standing. That counts for something. That bridge has held up through storms that would have taken down buildings twice its strength, Patricia. We can hold up too. We're older stock than we give ourselves credit for. She was quiet a moment, looking out at the tree line where, somewhere beyond it, the bridge sat catching the last of the afternoon light. Tell me, she said. Tell me the whole thing. Not the version you gave a strange kid on a wall. The whole thing, Aunt Elsa. I think I've earned that, don't you? And so I told her. Everything I'd told Sam, and more besides, things I hadn't said out loud in 41 years, things about the guilt that still visited me some nights like an old unwelcome friend who refuses to understand he's overstayed his welcome, things about the year after Danny died when I couldn't cross the bridge myself, when Frank had to carry groceries around the long way through the woods because I physically could not make my feet walk across those stones, until one morning in March of 1986 I woke up and thought, if I don't cross that bridge today, I never will, and then he really will have taken everything from me, including my nerve, and I got up, and I walked across it, shaking the whole way, and when I reached the other side I sat down right there in the dirt and cried until I had nothing left, and then I stood up and started pulling weeds from between the stones, because it was the only thing I could think to do with my hands that felt like love instead of grief. That was the first day, I told Patricia. The first day of 41 years of mornings. I didn't decide to make it a ritual. It just became one, the way habits do, one crack filled becoming two, becoming 10, becoming a life's work nobody asked me to take on. By the time I finished, the sun had gone down and we were sitting in near darkness on my porch, and Patricia had her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was small, before all the years and all the distance, and I thought, not for the first time that summer, that maybe grief doesn't actually get smaller with time, the way people say it does. Maybe it just makes more room around itself. Maybe you just get a bigger heart to hold it in, and more people willing to hold pieces of it with you, if you're brave enough to finally hand some of it over. I want to meet him, Patricia said into the dark. This Sam. The boy who cracked open the fortress. He'd like that, I said. Though fair warning, he's got a mouth on him and no filter whatsoever. Runs in the family, apparently, she said, and I swatted her arm, and we both laughed, there in the dark, on a porch 50 yards from a bridge that had taken so much and, apparently, was not quite done giving back. Summer moved fast after that, the way summers do when something in you has finally started thawing after a long winter you didn't fully realize you'd been standing in. Sam kept coming, most afternoons, though as June wore into July, his visits took on a different shape, less about escaping the yelling at home, which had mostly stopped once the divorce papers were actually signed and both his parents seemed, against all odds, to breathe easier for it, and more about just wanting to be there. Wanting to help. He'd gotten good with the trowel, better than I expected from a boy who'd shown up not knowing a wrench from a screwdriver. "You're going to put me out of a job," I told him one Saturday morning, watching him work mortar into a crack with a careful, focused expression that reminded me so powerfully of Danny that it took my breath for a moment, not with grief this time, but with something gentler. Recognition. Continuity. The strange, quiet grace of watching love find a new shape to live in. "Somebody's gotta do it when you're too old," he said, entirely too casually for an 11-year-old discussing his elderly friend's mortality, and I laughed so hard I had to sit down on the wall. "Too old? I'll have you know I could still outwork you on my worst day." "Sure, Elsa. I could." "Sure you could." It was Patricia's idea, actually, to open the shed. She'd come up for the 4th of July, had started coming up more regularly since our talk on the porch, once a month now instead of once a season, and something had eased between us that I hadn't realized was tense until it wasn't anymore, and she found me standing outside the shed door one evening, key in hand, not quite able to turn the lock. "You don't have to," she said gently, coming to stand beside me. "I know I don't have to." I looked at the key, worn smooth from 11 years around my neck, never used. "But I think I want to. Patricia, I think Sam needs a bicycle that isn't a hand-me-down secret. I think Danny's bike has been waiting 11 years for somebody who'd actually ride it into the sunshine instead of leaving it in the dark." "Are you sure?" I thought about the question the way I think about a crack in old stone, not rushing it, feeling for where it wants to give. "I don't think grief works the way people expect," I said slowly. "I don't think it's a wound that closes and that's the end of it. I think it's more like this bridge. You don't fix a bridge once and walk away. You tend it. Forever. Some days the crack is small and some days a whole section needs rebuilding, and you never really finish, you just keep showing up with your trowel and your bucket and you do the next necessary thing. And I think maybe the next necessary thing isn't keeping that shed locked anymore. I think it's letting what's inside it live again." I turned the key. It stuck at first, stubborn from years of disuse, and then it gave, and the door swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved since Frank was alive, and there, in the dusty gold light of a July evening, sat everything I'd been keeping from the world for 11 years. Danny's bicycle, red once, rust-spotted now, training wheels long removed. His fishing rod, still strung with the same line, still tied with the same badly knotted hook he'd insisted on tying himself, age 6, tongue between his teeth in concentration. A box of clothes I couldn't look at directly. A drawing, taped to the inside of the door, faded nearly to nothing, a bridge, 2 stick figures, holding hands. Patricia made a small sound beside me, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's the one on your birthday card," Sam said. He'd come up behind us, silent as only kids can be, and was staring at the drawing with wide eyes. "You showed me that card. The one in your tin box." "He drew this one first," I said, my voice thick. "Gave a copy to me for my birthday, kept the original for himself. Said the bridge needed a picture of itself so it would remember what it looked like happy." Nobody said anything for a long moment. The evening light moved through the dusty shed, catching the rust on the bicycle frame, the faded red of it, the whole quiet weight of 11 years of unopened grief. "Can I clean it up?" Sam asked finally, very quietly. "The bike. I could fix the rust. I've gotten pretty good with tools, Elsa taught me." I looked at this boy, this stubborn, sharp, tender-hearted boy who'd ridden into my life with a broken chain and no idea he was about to break open a fortress 11 years in the making, and I thought about Danny, who would be 48 years old now if the water had been kinder, who would probably have kids of his own, who I would probably be teaching to fix bicycles in some other version of a life that got stolen from all of us in October of 1985. I think, I said, that Danny would like that very much. I think he'd like knowing his bike gets to be a bike again, instead of a museum piece nobody's allowed to touch. Sam nodded, solemn as a small priest accepting a sacred task, and reached in and, with great care, wheeled the old red bicycle out into the evening light. We spent the rest of that summer fixing it together, Sam, Patricia, and me, an unlikely trio if ever there was one, sanding rust, oiling the chain, replacing the seat that had cracked with age. And somewhere in the sanding and the oiling and the slow, patient work of bringing something old back to life, I found myself talking about Danny more freely than I had in decades, not just the ending, which I'd told once and didn't need to tell again, but the middle. The good part. The part where a 4-year-old thought I was a witch and a 7-year-old thought a bridge was magic and a whole family, briefly, impossibly, had exactly what it needed. He would have liked you, I told Sam one evening, both of us sitting on the bridge wall while Patricia photographed the sunset on her phone like the world's least subtle tourist. You've got his stubbornness. His curiosity. The way you ask questions nobody wants to answer, straight to the heart of things, no mercy. Is that a compliment? It's the highest compliment I know how to give. He smiled at that, and looked down at the creek, quieter now than it had been in October of 1985, gentler, the way water gets in the slow gold light of a July evening. My parents are doing better, he said, apropos of nothing, the way kids share their real news. Not together. But better. My mom laughed yesterday. Like, really laughed, not the sad fake kind. First time in like a year. That's good, Sam. That's really good. I think it's because of here, he said, gesturing vaguely at the bridge, the stones, the whole quiet kingdom of it. I think I stopped being so angry all the time, and that made things easier at home. Is that weird? That a bridge did that? I thought about Danny's crayon drawing, taped inside a shed door for 11 years. I thought about a promise made in the worst grief of my life that had somehow, 41 years later, become the exact thing that helped a broken-hearted boy find his footing again. I don't think it's weird at all, I said. I think that's exactly what bridges are for. By August, the bicycle was fixed, repainted a red so bright it practically glowed, Danny's original drawing carefully removed, framed, and hung in my kitchen where I could see it every morning over coffee instead of hidden away in the dark. Sam rode it everywhere now, his own bicycle finally beyond repair and cheerfully retired, and something about seeing that old red frame moving fast and joyful down the country roads did something to my chest every single time, not grief exactly, though grief was certainly still present, an old companion I'd stopped trying to evict. Something more like gratitude. Something more like peace. Patricia started coming up every other weekend instead of once a month. She brought a folding chair and sat on the bridge some evenings, keeping the old woman company, as she put it, though I suspected it was less about company and more about finally, after 41 years, wanting to understand a piece of family history that had been locked away from her. I'm going to help you, she announced one Saturday in August, entirely without warning, holding a trowel she clearly had no idea how to use. Help me with what? The bridge. Elsa, you're 83. I've been thinking about this for weeks. When you can't do this anymore, and I don't say that to be cruel, I say it because it's the truth and someone in this family needs to say true things to you occasionally. when you can't do this anymore, somebody needs to keep the promise. I want it to be me. And Sam, if he's willing. I looked between the two of them, my niece, 49 years old, finally letting herself grieve a cousin she barely remembered because nobody had ever let her, and Sam, 12 now, his birthday having come and gone in July with a cake I'd baked myself and candles he'd blown out with a wish he refused to share, because then it won't come true, Elsa, everybody knows that. And I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the exact opposite of the feeling I'd had for 11 years. Staring at a locked shed door. "You'd do that?" I asked. "Both of you? Keep coming up here, keep fixing stone, long after I'm gone?" "Elsa," Sam said, with the particular exasperation only a 12-year-old can properly deploy, "I've been coming up here for a bicycle chain that got fixed in, like, week 1. I think we're a little bit past what Patricia laughed, and I laughed, and even the creek seemed to laugh a little, chattering along under the bridge the way it had for hundreds of years before any of us were born and would, I suspected, for hundreds of years after we were all gone too. "All right," I said, when I could speak again. "All right. Then I suppose it's time I taught you both properly. Mortar's not just slapped on, you know. There's a ratio. There's a technique. You don't rush the crack, you let it breathe," Sam finished, in a fair imitation of my own voice, "and then you fill it slow, or the patch won't hold." "He's a fast learner," Patricia said. "He's a stubborn learner," I corrected. Which, in my experience, works out to about the same thing in the end. I want to tell you something before I let you go, because you've come this far with me, and I think you've earned the ending properly, not just the parts that made you cry or laugh along the way. Grief, I've learned, after 83 years of living and 41 years of kneeling on old stone with a trowel in my hand, grief is not a debt you pay off. It's not a wound with a scar that eventually stops aching when you press on it. It is, I think, much more like a bridge. It stands. It doesn't move. It's always there, connecting the person you were before to the person you have to become after, and the water underneath it never quite stops running, never quite goes still. But here is the thing nobody tells you, the thing I had to learn on my knees, one crack at a time, over 4 decades, you get to decide what that bridge is for. You can leave it to crumble, let the moss take it, let the cracks widen until nobody can safely cross it at all, until it becomes nothing but a monument to the worst day of your life. Or you can tend it. You can clean it every single morning, rain or shine, bad hip or good, and you can let it become something else entirely, not a monument to loss, but a place where the living still get to cross. Where a stranger's grandson can wander up with a broken bicycle chain and, without either of you planning it, help you finally set down a weight you've been carrying alone since October of 1985. Danny didn't come back. I want to be honest with you about that, because I don't believe in false comfort, and I don't think you came here for a fairy tale. The water took him, and no amount of mortar, no number of mornings on my knees, will ever undo that. That is simply, permanently, unbearably true, and some days, fewer now than there used to be, but some days still, it is exactly as unbearable as it was in 1985. But I discovered something else, something I never expected when I started this bridge keeping all those years ago as a way of surviving my own worst day. Love doesn't actually stop when the person you love is gone. It just runs out of a direct place to go, and it has to find a new channel, the way water does when a path gets blocked. Mine found a bridge. It found 41 years of quiet, stubborn maintenance that looked, from the outside, like an old woman being strange about a pile of stones. But from the inside, it was the only way I knew how to keep loving a boy I couldn't hold anymore. Every crack filled was a sentence in a conversation that never really ended, just changed its language. And then, this past spring, that same love found a new channel entirely, a boy named Sam, riding up with a broken chain and a broken home, needing exactly the kind of steady, patient tending that a bridge keeper had 41 years of practice giving. And through him, it found Patricia. And through both of them, it found its way back into the parts of my family I'd locked away for decades, believing I was protecting them, when really I was just protecting myself from having to feel, in front of witnesses, how much it still hurt. Sam still comes up most afternoons, though he's got his own trowel now, his own technique, his own particular way of talking to the stone while he works that reminds me so much of Danny at Aches, in the good way aching sometimes can. Patricia's up most weekends. We're teaching her the ratio, the technique, the patience it takes to fill a crack properly instead of rushing it and watching it fail come the first hard frost. Someday, and I say this without fear, because 83 years teaches you that fear of the inevitable is just wasted energy better spent on the mortar bucket, someday I won't be able to kneel on this bridge anymore. My hip, which has been threatening retirement for a decade, will finally get its way. And when that day comes, I know now, with a certainty I didn't have even 6 months ago, that the bridge will still be tended. That the promise I made in the worst grief of my life will keep being kept, by hands that aren't mine, carrying love that started with me and Frank and a little boy who thought this bridge was magic, and now belongs to a niece who finally got let all the way in, and a boy who wasn't ours by blood but became ours anyway, the way family sometimes does when you're brave enough to leave the door unlocked. If there's a lesson here, and I think there is, though I've never been much for tidy morals, life's too messy for those most days, I think it's this: the things that break us don't have to stay broken forever, standing empty and locked, gathering moss and rust in the dark. You can tend them instead. Slowly. Patiently. One crack at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one locked shed door finally, bravely opened at a time. And if you do, if you have the stubbornness for it, the kind that runs in certain families and shows up, unexpectedly, in certain strangers' children too, you might find that the very thing that broke your heart becomes the thing that teaches you how to keep it open again. I still walk out every morning with my bucket and my bad hip. I still check every stone for new cracks the winter might have made. But I don't walk out alone anymore, most days, and I don't walk out with grief as my only company. I walk out with love. The same love I always had, just finally, after 41 years, given somewhere new to go. That's the whole story. That's why an old woman tends a bridge nobody asked her to tend. Some promises, once you make them, are the kind you keep not because you have to, but because they're the only way you know how to keep loving someone the water took, one patient morning at a time, for as long as you possibly can. The old woman never became famous. Her name was never written in history books. Most travelers forgot her face as life carried them forward. But every person who crossed that bridge left with something they didn't have before, a little hope, a little courage, or simply the comfort of knowing that someone had listened. Sometimes the greatest lives aren't measured by how far we travel, but by how many people find their way because we were there when they needed us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more original storytelling, and let me know in the comments, if you could spend 1 hour on that bridge with anyone, who would you choose, and why? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.